Hello, everyone. This is A Bit of Business. My name is John FitzGerald, and on behalf of LearMedia.tv and the British and Irish Trading Alliance, welcome to the show. Have you ever wondered what goes into building a truly great business? Have you ever wondered why so many new businesses fail? Have you ever wondered why some businesses succeed and many others never make it? Well, today we're going to dig into these and other questions that business owners regularly grapple with every single day. Our special guests are Richard Spacey and Chris Harding, and they are very well placed to discuss this relevant topic of building a business as we start to see light at the end of the COVID-19 tunnel. Richard is a partner at CH1 Investments in London and a chartered fellow of the CISI. He has been in financial services for over 27 years, including many years at Lloyds Bank, several years at an offshore private bank, 3 years in a boutique financial services office focused on UK tax planning, and 8 years at Vestra Wealth, successfully raising funds in various sectors. He is also a director of several of the investments he has advised on, including Keystone Energy, Tavern Restaurants, and Osprey Solar. With so much experience to call on, Richard has an incredible ability to truly get under the skin of a business to see if it will succeed. Chris is a business transformation specialist who understands the challenges at different stages of the personal and business growth journey. He has worked on everything from local startups to complex global organizations. He knows exactly where to start, what questions to ask, and when to challenge. Importantly, he knows how to architect an enterprise and in which order to build it. Having now worked with over 100 SMEs, his approach is tried and tested, and believe me, it works. That's it, folks. As ever, please do check out the BITA website, BITA.ie, for news about upcoming events, including face-to-face events, and also ongoing initiatives, including the Be Plastic Aware campaign that is focused on reducing the amount of plastic used in the construction sector across Ireland and the UK. Chris and Richard coming up next. Please do stay tuned. So we're now live with Richard and Chris. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So let's dive straight in. There's many questions that go through the mind of a business owner or an entrepreneur on a regular basis, and two in particular. One, how do I grow my business? Two, how do I secure investment to scale? So let me start with you, Chris. How do you approach the how do I grow my business question with the companies that you work with?
Well, I guess, look, when people come to see me, very often they have a very narrow question of, can you make my thing work better? And the answer is always, it depends. How much of the puzzle have you actually put in place already? Because if you think about it, if you want to just make it grow or either get more from what you're doing, you could just do more of what you're doing. But if you're actually going to grow it, you need to think about it differently, right? And so what the place a lot of people start is, how do I get more sales? Because that's growth, right? There's one kind of growth. How do I get more sales? And the answer again is, it depends. Because if you Google how to get more sales, Google will send you 4.5 billion pages in less than a second with ideas on how to get more sales. I mean, what are you going to do with that? You have to think about it differently. And the way I explain it is, I've spent about 12 years working with more than 100 business owners and teams, taking the puzzle apart to understand what's really holding them back from getting to the next level. And very often there's pieces missing. They're doing a lot of activity. They think they've got all the pieces in place. They've got a marketing guy, they've got a sales guy, they've got an HR guy, they've got every other kind of guy, technology guy, all the guys. including gals. But there's no alignment. It's not all working together. It's like cogs in a box and no Swiss watch. So it's really about, if you want to get, really grow, you need to align all the pieces for growth. Think of it more like engineering than just activity.
And Richard, just building on that, when companies come to you to seek investment, what are you looking for in that business or business owner?
It depends what state the business is at. So most of the businesses that we prefer to invest in are post-revenue. So they've proven their business model. So they've proven they can, whatever their widget is, they can prove they can sell that widget, and that widget works in the marketplace and somebody wants it. So then it's really exactly what Chris has just said. So it's having a look to see that those people that they have in place are the right people. And that can be from a strategic or a practical point of view. So a lot of businesses will lose people as you go through, because what was right at the beginning might not necessarily be right after 2 or 3 years. And really, it's making sure I think what we try and look for is either like a really focused approach to the business. So if company A is selling, beer to bars, and they've successfully sold beer to bars, and they come in to tell me they want to sell beer on cruise ships halfway around the world that they've never been in the market for, I always find that desperately worrying. So I like people to be focused on what they're doing. They've succeeded because they're good at what they're doing. So trying to keep them focused and going on the right path, rather than dinosaur hunting, big shiny ball hunting, whatever you want to call it. Trying to keep them focused on one thing. I remember the business that we spoke about, John, originally had one of our concerns about it was the directions it was taken, and to keep it laser focused on what they were good at and the area they were good at. So if you can dominate that small market you're in first, once you're in a dominant position, that's when you start to think about trying to dominate something you've never done before, I always think.
And Chris, having worked with so many different companies, why do many, perhaps the majority of startups actually fail?
Well, you could answer that in many different ways, but I think fundamentally, we're not set up to think entrepreneurially. We go to school curious, and they kind of squeeze it out of us, and they say, listen, John, you're a very curious kid, but I want you to learn these answers to these questions. You can go to the next level. And it's inevitable that, if you go to the next level, you go to the best school, you go to the best uni, you get the best job, you get the promotion. And we learn to think really like employees, like people who are skilled to do a certain activity. And it's not a new problem that 80% of small businesses never get to the next level, because people think like employees. They're not taught to think like engineers, putting the puzzle together. So they might be very good at the activity that they do, but there's a whole different level of thinking and skill set to create something, to engineer something, to put a puzzle together, to figure out how to hire the right people. As Richard says, have you got the right people doing the right things? It's a very tough challenge. I mean, I always say that becoming the global COO of a foreign exchange business was really easy compared to being responsible for imagining, designing, building, growing, organizing a whole business. However small it is, that is a much tougher gig. And most people are not trained or ready to do that.
Is there an order then, Chris, to putting these building blocks in place, do you think?
I think it's helpful if you always have all the building blocks in mind. And if you think of the metaphor of a baby, right? When it's a baby, when you were a baby, John, you're still the same person that when you were a baby, but you're a lot more advanced now, right? So in many ways, all the components matter all of the time. But like Richard says, you start out with the simple stuff. Does anybody want this product? Can I sell this thing? Is there a market for this thing? And when you're in an early stage, you've got probably a pretty tight knit team where everybody likes and trusts one another, and you can get a lot of stuff done. But to get beyond that, you have to start thinking about other things like technology and systems and processes, and measuring how well is our assumptions actually working. Is it possible to grow this? What's the cost of acquisition? It becomes more complex. So you need to raise your game to a higher level of thinking.
And Richard, when you look at businesses, in your view, how much of the business success is due to the skill set of the founders versus the mindset of the founders?
Well, that's a good question. We have this argument all the time with entrepreneurs. So people who do think entrepreneurially are brilliant to work with 90% of the time. And the 10% is generally when the business has been a success. Because what happens is they kind of get egomaniacal. And success goes to people's head, and they believe because they've done it once, they're going to be generally brilliant at everything that they ever do, and they'll never fail, and the business succeeded because of them. No business succeeds because of one person generally. The idea is one thing. Actually making it work, a lot of entrepreneurs don't have the skill set to do. And the bad ones are the ones that don't recognize that they don't have the skill set to do it and still continue to plow their own foray. And they're very, very almost impossible to work with. And they're relatively easy to spot once you've got a bit of experience. But they are very, very painful if you've not experienced them before. Some businesses succeed in spite of the people who run them, and some businesses succeed because of the people who run them. You're never 100% sure until you've worked with them for 6 or 12 months which one you've got on your hands, really. So it's very, very tricky. But I think generally you need the entrepreneur needs to have an enormous amount of passion, an enormous amount of drive, and they need to be incredibly humble because they need to recognise what they're not good at. And that's where the ones who succeed are brilliant at. They recognise to put the people around them to do those jobs.
Well, same question.
And more importantly, they let them do those jobs, which is really, really crucial.
And what percentage of the time, in your experience, have you seen that humility?
Not that often. 20% of the time, if we're lucky. Yeah, I think it's one of the most difficult things to happen in the business is for the original founder to let go of his baby. And to let, if they're used to doing everything for their entire business from day one, to give control over to somebody else is a very, very difficult thing to do. And I always think that's where most businesses who fall over at that tipping point, when they're either going to be successful or the favourites, I think that is the one defining factor. So if they let the people that they come in, there's nothing worse than employing a head of sales and then the entrepreneur or whoever it is in the business overlooking his shoulder all the time, telling him he's not doing his job properly. That's his fault. He hired the wrong person if that's the case. You've got to let those people do their jobs properly, and you've got to trust them to do their jobs. A lot of entrepreneurs find that very, very difficult. And that you can't grow if you're a one-man band. You've got to bring other people into play.
And Chris, same question to you. What are your thoughts on the skill set versus the mindset and how both contribute to the success of a business?
So look, I think most of us have been brought up in a framework where we think it's just about information and skill set. But that's where I think you get this cogs in a box kind of scenario where you can have all the people with the right skill sets. You can have the right sales guy who knows about sales, but if you haven't actually sat down together as a team and made sure you're on the same page, it still doesn't necessarily work. So mindset is an interesting challenge, and it encompasses a whole load of ideas, right? I think perspective might be a much more important word. The way you see it determines the way you think about it, determines the way you do it. So it's really important to get the whole team playing with it creatively to understand whether they see it the same way. Because if you don't see it the same way, you can be using exactly the same language and completely misinterpreting one another. So in answer to your question, the short answer is mindset is fundamental. But mindset is not just about positive mental attitude. It's about perspective. It's about what I think is really going on here. And are we agreed about what we think is really going on here? Because if you do that, you can go anywhere. And I think the important thing to say is, in a sort of almost post-pandemic world, 10 years on from a financial crisis, a world where it's not going back to the way it was, it's even more important now that teams get around the table and get aligned with what they think is really going on and what they think is really possible and what they're prepared to do together to make something happen.
How easy is this, Chris?
It's not easy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the 80% failure rate. But I fundamentally believe it's possible, which is why I've spent 12 years taking the puzzle apart to see how can you accelerate the learning of people. And one of the ways that I do that is by giving them visual maps of what's really going on, so they instantly see it differently. And the thing is, it's not just the owners. If the whole team sees differently what's really going on here and what I contribute to the whole thing, then it changes everything. Yeah, it's not easy, but it's definitely possible.
And Richard, what are your thoughts on this coming out of a global pandemic? Have you seen a shift in the way people are looking at businesses, approaching their business, and essentially running their businesses?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot probably over the last 6 or 7 months. I think there was a big switch away from offices and away from face-to-face meetings, and I think in the last 6 months that has started to change quite dramatically backwards again to getting people in a room together. I think the actual being together is an enormous amount a part of that growth in the business and that ethos and that mindset together. It's very, very difficult, I think, to develop genuine relationships via a computerized medium, whatever that medium is. And it's, the communications as we're doing today are much, much better than they've ever been. But it isn't the same spending a couple of hours down the pub with your colleagues at the end of the day when you can talk and let off steam, you can get your frustrations out together, and you've got a joint mission. And I think that is very, very difficult from remotely. And I know a lot of people who've changed jobs in the last year have found it very, very difficult to integrate themselves into a new team using this sort of medium. It's nigh on impossible. You can't develop a proper relationship. We have a pretty thin veneer of a single conversation. Whereas if you're together, your conversation will generally fly all over the place, as opposed to just a very, very structured approach to meetings, which I think is what you have via Zoom or via Skype or whatever the medium is you're using. And there's a reason that people like, salespeople have always pressed the flesh, because it's people like being with people. And I don't think that has changed. I think the younger generation is slightly different to us, and I think they probably haven't recognised the need for it as much yet. But I think as they get into the 30s, they'll soon recognise face-to-face meetings and being with people is a much better way to do business. And it's if you're growing your business, it's almost impossible to do it remotely, I think, very, very successfully, because you don't get to know the people you're working with properly and they don't get to know you properly. And that's where the lines of communications fall over, because everyone goes away from a meeting with a different thought. You get that person, but if you're in the same office, you pretty quickly recognise if somebody's walked out of the meeting and they haven't got what you were talking about in the meeting. Whereas if we all finish our Zoom call, everyone's gone off in 10 different directions and you're not together, you just don't know. And you'll find out the next time you have a Zoom call and you think, I'm pretty sure that didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing makes perfect sense. And especially for people new to an organization during this pandemic, where it's virtually, literally impossible to have a face-to-face discussion with somebody. So when the relationship doesn't exist, it makes it that much more difficult to, one, get to know people properly, but also second, to understand the culture of an organization because you are so remote from it. Chris, what are your thoughts on this post-pandemic world and how things are changing?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's a really good thing. Certainly the organizations I'm working with, what we're realizing is that it's okay to do management meetings over this forum. But if you want to do anything creative, innovative, troubleshooting, it's much, much better if you're in the same room with a blank sheet of paper where you can sketch out what you think's going on and play with the ideas and really listen to each other. I don't know if it's okay to say this, but at the beginning of lockdown, we started this new online community called Inspired CEOs, right? And every week we get an interesting speaker into the room. It's for CEOs, as the name suggests. And there's one guy who's a really interesting guy called Bob Murray, who's a neurogeneticist. And one of the things he was sharing with us is that we are physically engineered for relationship. There are neurons in your heart that mean when you're actually in proximity to somebody, you connect in a different kind of way than over a screen like this. You cannot connect in the same way. I mean, this is not just preference stuff we're talking about here. This is neurogenetics, that we're wired for relationship. We're wired to connect and collaborate. And so, yeah, this is not just about, in theory, you could all do this over Zoom. In reality, it makes a difference if you're sitting across the table from someone. Makes a massive difference.
So, Richard, in this sort of COVID world over the last 12 months, when companies have come to you seeking investment, does it make your job that much harder to really get under the skin of what's going on in the business?
Hugely. Yeah. We've been much more cautious, I think, this last 12 months than we would have. We're always cautious, but we've been even more cautious. So the businesses, I think we'll have done 3 equity raises in 12 months, which is probably half what we normally do. That's principally because we've not been able to sit with people. So you get to a point, I think, when you're investing in any business, there's always gaps. And you make the choice whether you jump over those gaps, and you're willing to jump over that gap because you trust the person you're with, or you've seen the vision that they've got. And I found that much more difficult during, doing that over Zoom. I've been much more cautious and much more hesitant to make those leaps of faith. The businesses that we have backed have either been introduced to us from existing investors, or we've known the entrepreneurs behind the business a long time. So we've already had relationships with those businesses or those business people before we've invested with them, which is tricky. Having said that, we've just signed off on yesterday, which will be a new business that we saw 12 months ago in person just before lockdown. It didn't raise because of lockdown, that we're going to raise for now. But yeah, really, 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 really tough. Probably the hardest bit about our business has been finding new businesses this year. Because our clients are our clients. So we have those relationships. So talking to them on the telephone isn't that much different to what we would normally do anyway, because we've had those relationships 5-10 years. But building a new relationship with new businesses that you're going to put millions of pounds into is tricky over this medium.
Chris, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think starting new things is tricky when you're not seeing people face to face. Because as Richard says, you need to be able to look people in the eye and figure out whether or not you trust they can do what they say they can do, or whether they're genuinely committed to doing what they say they can do, or they're just looking for a shortcut. Because there's certainly lots of businesses who feel that money just solves the problems and gives them more runway, rather than, have they actually got a strategy behind it to make the money work? It's tricky.
So a question for both of you. Richard, maybe you can comment first. When you look back over the last several years, either a business that you've invested in or a business that you've seen and perhaps maybe have not invested in, can you think of one that stands out where you really admired the plan, the strategy, the founders, the owners? Give us the name, tell us why it was so good, why you invested or maybe not invested at the time, but why it then succeeded subsequently, given what you'd observed?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. So in the last 18 months, we've backed 2 businesses, one called iProve and one called Verti Health. iProve is a genuine presence assurance technology. So if any of you have signed up on the NHS app in the last 3 months, you will have gone through a facial recognition program and a general presence assurance check, and that is the data that has been backed by iProve. We loved the management team. We knew the original investor founders. I'll be honest with you, when we first saw it, I had to be severely convinced that it was a real thing. And I'm, to be honest, I'm still not 100% sure, but they are selling loads of it. So, they've got contracts now globally. So in the last 18 months, they've gone from a £3 million turnover to they'll turn over £17.5 million this year. They just signed up the government of Singapore, the government of Australia, they signed up the NHS, wow. Homeland Security in the US, Department of Works and Pensions in the UK. And they've just been incredibly successful. And I think what they've done better than a lot of businesses, they're a tech-focused business, but I think their CEO, almost all the way through lockdown, they had face-to-face meetings with the senior management and their teams to make sure that they still kept that connection with them. And they were very, very focused on building out their team. They're an incredibly experienced management team, and they've got a great set of mentors behind them as well. So I think what they've done very successfully is bring people on board with and continue to keep the ethos of the business as it grows, which I think is the most difficult thing, as Chris was saying earlier, to keep that ethos as you grow. I always liken it to restaurants. So if you open one successful restaurant, it's brilliant, it's great. If you then make a second restaurant, the second restaurant will be slightly diluted. When you get to 100 restaurants, the 100th restaurant doesn't look like the first restaurant at all. Doesn't carry any of the same ethos, doesn't have any of the same standards. And that's when usually we're just before the private equity companies buy them and really ruin them forever. And that's the same with growing your team. That ethos will dilute out the bigger you get. So it's very, very tricky to do that, and very important that you've got a management team who can do that. iProve was really successful. Verti was very, very similar in that it was a tech platform that basically removes person-to-person training. Incredible amount of luck for COVID for us, really, because that means that business is more important than ever for people to do incredible life-saving training. So they've gone from, I think we invested when they had, I think their income was about £80,000 per year, and they, within 14 months, for a software business, they were turning a profit of about £1.5 million, which is in the 10 years we've been doing this, is the first business that I've ever seen A, hit their numbers in year one, and B, turn a profit. Because most tech platforms will tell you it's all about growth, so don't worry about profit, just worry about growth. And I personally, I love profit. So it was really great to see that.
They're great examples, and you mentioned good management team, good mentors, a good strategy, face-to-face, the connection, the culture, the ethos, all building blocks of terrific businesses, and rarely they're all at the same time. Yeah. But when you see it, you know it. Chris, your thoughts on businesses that you've been impressed by over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think the businesses that most impressed me is the ones where the leaders are hungry to learn, and they're open to being challenged and to learn. And I can think of a couple of businesses. One of my favorites is a company called Mezzo Labs that is a specialist in digital marketing analytics. They've got some amazing clients. The owner of that business is always open-minded, always evolving, always developing not just the bottom line, but developing the team, even in simple ways. For example, like bringing in a life coach as an employee benefit to help the team think about what they want to get out of their working life. It's a much more holistic approach. I'm currently working with a guy who is trying to reinvent employment law solutions and HR solutions, creating an online community, a subscription model for that. It's very, very interesting. The most interesting business I met recently is a guy who, out of personal tragedy, started a business called Once I've Gone, which is helping people to get their financial affairs in order in a single place, given that the digital world means we no longer have a filing cabinet, John, with our will and our bank statements and all those other, everything's digital. So when it comes to the passing of a loved one, it becomes a nightmare to know where anything is. And so he's created this subscription model where you can actually begin to put all of your important stuff in one place. Brilliant business. He gives it away free to armed services people. He gives it away free to people who have a critical illness. But I think that business is going to go miles. It's really interesting.
Wow, that is an interesting one, and timely, given the digital revolution and the era that we're living in. So, guys, just as a sort of a summary, if you were to give, there's hundreds of businesses across the BITA community in the UK and in Ireland, and we have a wider business audience through learmedia.tv, which goes out from Limerick in Ireland. And lots of business owners are interested in continuing to grow their business and improve their own lifestyle, etc. So if you are on television, and you are actually on television now, and everybody, all of the business owners in the community were watching, what would be your 3 best tips or pieces of advice for business owners as they go on their growth journeys? Maybe start with you, Richard, on this one.
I would say every now and again, take a step back from your business. Take that extra yard, have a look at your business from the top. I think a lot of us, and I'm no different, we can get very, very focused on the minutiae of the business, and sometimes you forget where you're actually going, and you just need that little bit of break sometimes just to step back, have a think about really what you want to achieve in the next 12, 18, 24, 36, 60 months. And it gives you that little break to then come back to your team and make sure that those little things that you're all focusing on getting in the way of the big picture. I think that happens too often. I think focus on what you're good at. So dominate the market that you're in. Try not to be distracted by the next greatest thing. And the third thing I would say, never go to somebody and ask for money and tell them you're going to be the next Google or YouTube, and don't show me a J curve, please.
Very good. Chris, your top 3 tips?
Okay. Tip number 1 would be get your team together with a blank sheet of massive whiteboard and map out the customer journey. So that it becomes less like a collection of activities and one coherent thing. What problem do we solve for our customers, and what is it about the way we do it that's better than anybody else? And map it out, and who contributes what to each step of this journey. You'll be surprised at how empowering that is for your team to get on the same page if they can visualize the customer journey, because the customer journey is your product, right? That is your business. That is one way of looking at what your business really is. The second thing I would say is pay attention to the numbers. Don't just count stuff. Actually analyze at every stage of that customer journey what's actually going on and how do we make it work better, because small changes all add up. And do it with your team. Don't try and figure it all out yourself. Your team has much more creativity than you imagine, and many of them will be a lot closer to what's really going on than you are as the business owner. So use your team to actually really understand it. Listen to what they're saying. Don't feel threatened. Just play together. And the third thing would be have fun. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, stop doing it. Have some fun with what you're doing. Create something amazing. And there are some incredible businesses around the world that aren't massive, but they're amazing. And so just choose to be an amazing business.
Gentlemen, look, terrific insights there. So thank you so much. Appreciate the fact that you could join us today. We're sort of out of time now, but thank you for your considered insights. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been A Bit of Business. My name is John FitzGerald. Thank you so much for joining us. All the best for now.
Thank you very much.
Yes.